Rain lashed the neon-lit windows of the roadside diner. In the corner booth, two corporate security guards in wet overcoats crowded a shivering, soaked woman, blocking her exit. Thomas wiped a smear of syrup from his 7-year-old daughter's chin. His hands were thick, marked with old chisel scars, smelling of white oak and motor oil. He stood up, resting a heavy, calloused palm flat on the corner of their booth. He didn't raise his fist. He didn't raise his voice. "She's with me," Thomas said. The low steel in his tone made both men step back. The wood stove ticked softly in the corner of the barn workshop, casting long shadows across benches stacked with rough-sawn white oak. Thomas carried a sleeping Clara up the loft stairs, his heavy work boots making no sound on the seasoned pine treads. When he returned, he set a steaming tin mug of black tea on the workbench beside Eleanor. She sat on a cedar block, wrapped in an oversized flannel shirt that smelled of dried shavings and clean rain. Her trembling hands gripped the tin, but her eyes kept drifting to the drafting table behind the bandsaw. Rolled between precision brass calipers and a hand-forged drawknife was a framed engineering commendation from 2 decades prior, the lead structural designer for the state's deepest suspension spans. Thomas didn't mention it. He picked up a Japanese pull saw, testing the blade against his thumb before addressing a mortise joint. Under her seat, half hidden by her soaked trench coat, sat a water-damaged leather briefcase bearing the gold emblem of Vance Holdings, the multi-billion-dollar development firm currently serving demolition notices across the entire Heritage Timber District. Neither spoke of who they were. The iron stove ticked, and the rain drummed steadily against the corrugated tin roof. A black European SUV crunched heavily over the wet gravel outside the double sliding doors. Thomas didn't look up from the workbench. He set the edge of a starred combination square against a 4x8 beam of cured ash, drawing a crisp pencil line across the grain. Up in the loft, the floorboards gave a faint creak as Eleanor pulled Clara gently into the shadows behind a stack of air-dried walnut slabs. Julian Croft stepped into the shop, his polished leather Oxfords grinding oak shavings into the damp concrete. 2 private security contractors waited by the threshold, hands folded across dark overcoats. "Quaint," Croft said, tossing a manila legal envelope onto the bench. It slid past a row of freshly honed bevel-edged chisels, stopping against an oilstone. "Final notice, Thomas. Vance Holdings exercises its municipal easement at the end of the month. You take $300,000, or the county takes it for nothing." Thomas laid the square down. His fingers, gray with fine timber dust, rested lightly on the cast-iron body of a No. 7 jointer plane. He didn't touch the envelope. "The municipal easement requires 51% board consent," Thomas said, his voice flat, steady as seasoned timber. "You're 6% short without the principal trustee." Croft's eyes narrowed. He took a half-step forward, his manicured fingers twitching at his cuff. "The principal trustee is out of the picture. Sentimentality doesn't hold up in probate court, Carpenter." "It's not sentiment," Thomas said quietly, meeting the executive's gaze without blinking. "It's tensile strength. A structure with rotten footings drops under its own weight. Same goes for companies." Through the gaps in the loft flooring above, Eleanor watched Croft's jaw tighten in silent fury. She pressed her fingers against the cold brass rim of her grandfather's seal, hidden beneath the borrowed flannel. Morning light cut through the sawdust haze, illuminating the long maple workbench. Clara sat by the wood stove, tracing letters in a worn sketchbook while Thomas adjusted the lateral lever on a low-angle jack plane. Eleanor stood beside the bench, her flannel sleeves rolled to her elbows. She took the front tote of the plane as Thomas guided her grip. "Too much downforce," Thomas murmured, placing his calloused palm over her knuckles. "Let the iron do the work. Don't fight the resistance." Eleanor leaned into the stroke. The blade snagged hard against a nut in the white oak, digging a rough gouge into the timber. The tool stopped dead. "I forced it," she said, looking at the torn fibers. "You went against the grain," Thomas said gently. He picked up a hand-stitched leather strop, running the steel iron across it with rhythmic, practiced strokes. When I designed high-tension bridges, the board always wanted thinner steel and faster pores. They thought you could bend physics with enough capital. But metal fatigues, and green timber twists when you rush the kiln. He reset the blade to take a whisper-thin 0.03 of an inch. I left because Clara needed something that wouldn't snap under pressure, he continued, nodding toward his daughter. Wood teaches you to read where the fiber wants to run before you put an edge to it. If you respect the grain, the joint holds for 100 years. Eleanor placed her hands back on the rosewood handles. She drew a slow breath, squared her stance, and pushed smoothly along the length of the board. A single, unbroken ribbon of white oak curled up through the throat of the plane, falling softly onto her boots. Eleanor touched the glass-smooth surface beneath. Her eyes shifted toward her briefcase by the stove. "It's time to read the grain," she whispered. The fluorescent glare of the town council chamber buzzed against oak-paneled walls packed with weathered tradesmen. At the mahogany podium, Julian Croft straightened his bespoke cuffs, sliding a thick leather dossier across to the council president. "The Valley cannot subsidize obsolete manual trades," Croft announced, his voice carrying the cold finality of an auctioneer's gavel. "Vance Holdings assumes structural control under the eminent domain statute today. Sign the ledger, Mr. Chairman." The council president dipped his fountain pen toward the parchment. The heavy brass latches of the rear double doors struck the frame. Thomas walked down the center aisle. His work boots fell steady and unhurried against the linoleum, holding Clara's small hand in his calloused grip. Beside him walked Eleanor. She had washed the timber dust from her wrists. Dressed in her tailored charcoal trench, the gold family seal resting against her lapel, her presence commanded the chamber. Croft's pen stopped half an inch above the paper. The blood drained from his face as elder counselors stood in disbelief. "Step away from the ledger, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You don't hold the voting majority." "I do." Eleanor dropped a bound stack of forensic audit ledgers onto the council desk. "Unauthorized asset transfers. Forged proxy signatures," she said, her voice echoing through the stillness. "Julian Croft engineered this land seizure while concealing the majority trustee." The county sheriff stepped forward, a heavy hand clamping onto Croft's tailored shoulder, steering the pale executive toward the exit. Eleanor turned to the silent chamber, her hand resting on Thomas's dust-marked canvas sleeve. "This district will not be demolished," Eleanor declared. "Its preservation belongs to the master craftsman who built its bones, and defended its future." Autumn turned the valley maples to amber. In the workshop, late afternoon light cut through the rafters, illuminating the steady drift of cedar dust. The demolition notices were gone, replaced by a bronze registry charter establishing the Heritage Timber Guild, endowed permanently under the Vance Trust. At the main bench, Clara stood on a wooden crate, sweeping walnut shavings from a dry-fitted joint. Beside her, Eleanor wore a canvas apron over her flannel shirt, steadying a heavy ash beam with calm, practiced hands. She no longer forced the tool against the wood, she had learned how to let the fiber guide the cut. Thomas drove an oak peg home with a wooden mallet. The solid thwack settled deep into the concrete floor as the mortise drew tight, flush and immovable. "No glue," Clara announced, running a small thumb over the clean seam. Thomas set the mallet down, meeting Eleanor's gaze across the seasoned maple bench. "When you honor the grain," Thomas said softly, "the joint holds whatever weight you put on it." Through the open doors, the valley rested, anchored, unbroken, and built to outlast the storm.